I never imagined grief could be twisted into humiliation until the day we buried my grandfather. The church was still heavy with incense when the lawyer's voice carried through the hush. There was no will. My father's lips curled into a cruel smile, as if he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. He leaned toward me and said, almost gleefully, "You won't get a single cent. Your brother will be the next heir." My stomach dropped, not because of the money, but because of the way he looked at me, like I was disposable, invisible. My brother's smirk only drove the wound deeper. I wanted to scream, but no words came. That day felt like a storm that never ended. The sky over Boston was a heavy gray, pressing down on the black umbrellas scattered across the cemetery. Raindrops slid down my face, and I couldn't even tell if they were from the sky or the tears I refused to shed. I wanted to cry for him, for the man who had been my mentor, my safe place, the only one who ever made me believe I mattered. But the presence of my father and brother turned even my grief into a battlefield. When the final prayers ended, most people drifted away in silence, murmuring condolences. I stayed by the casket longer, watching as the earth began to swallow the man who had built our family's name with his own 2 hands. My father, Richard, rested a hand on my brother Ethan's shoulder, already talking business with guests as if the funeral were a networking event. His smile was polished, his handshake firm, and his grief was nowhere to be found. Later that evening, we gathered in the downtown office of my grandfather's lawyer. The atmosphere was tense, the room dimly lit by yellow lamps reflecting off dark wood panels. My heart beat painfully as the lawyer shuffled papers with deliberate slowness. For years, my grandfather had promised me that one day I would carry on his legacy, that honor and integrity would guide me to rebuild the company in his image. I clung to those words like a lifeline. The lawyer finally looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. "I regret to inform you," he said, his tone clinical, "that Mr. Eugene Moore passed without leaving a will. Under the law, the estate falls to his direct heir, his son, Richard Moore." The words echoed in the silence. My father's mouth curled into a smirk. He leaned forward, locking eyes with me, and his voice was sharp and cold, meant to cut. "You won't get a single cent. Your brother will be the next heir." Ethan chuckled beside him, twirling an expensive pen between his fingers. "Guess I'll need to start looking at yachts," he smeared, his eyes glinting with arrogance. I sat frozen, gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. The humiliation burned hotter than the grief. My grandfather's promises, his faith in me, suddenly felt like a cruel lie. I wanted to scream, to remind them of the nights I'd spent at his side, learning, working, believing. But the weight of my father's power pressed me into silence. All I could do was swallow the pain as my world crumbled around me. The days after the funeral blurred together, as if the world had lost its color. I returned to my small apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with memories I wasn't ready to unpack. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of him. My grandfather's handwriting on old notes, the watch he gave me when I graduated college, the photo of us standing proudly in front of the company building. Each item was a reminder of the promise he had made. "Emma, one day you will carry this legacy with honor." But now that legacy had been ripped away. At the office of Moore & Sons, my grandfather's construction empire, everything changed overnight. The staff, once warm and welcoming, avoided my gaze. Some looked at me with pity, others with fear, as if speaking to me might cost them their jobs. Richard wasted no time stepping into the role of CEO, strutting through the halls as if he'd built the empire himself. Ethan followed like a shadow, basking in the glow of his newfound power. I was summoned to the boardroom only once, and even now the memory makes my stomach turn. My father stood at the head of the table, flanked by executives who nodded along to his every word. His voice boomed with false authority.
"Emma has no role here anymore," he announced, his tone final. "From this day forward, Ethan will be groomed as the successor. This is family business, and I will not tolerate distractions."
The word distraction hit harder than any insult. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't family. I was an inconvenience he wanted erased. Ethan smirked, tapping the table with his manicured fingers. "Don't take it personally, sis. Some of us are just born for this." The room erupted in polite laughter, and I sat there numb, my throat tight. I wanted to defend myself, to remind them of the contracts I'd closed, the projects I'd overseen, the long nights I'd spent making sure deadlines were met. But none of it mattered. My father's word was law, and with a single breath, he erased years of sacrifice. That night, I wandered the empty streets of Boston, my heels clicking against wet pavement. I thought about the last time I'd spoken to my grandfather. He'd squeezed my hand, his voice weak but firm. "Promise me, Emma, no matter what happens, you'll stand tall. They cannot take your honor unless you give it away." I had promised him. Yet here I was, stripped of everything he'd left me, questioning whether I had the strength to keep that vow. For the first time, I truly felt alone. 3 nights after the humiliation in the boardroom, I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling when a knock rattled my door. For a moment, I froze. It was nearly midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart pounded as I opened it and found my mother standing there, soaked from the drizzle outside, clutching her purse like it held the weight of the world. "Mom?" My voice cracked. We hadn't spoken properly in months. She had always kept her head down, quietly orbiting my father's authority. She slipped inside without waiting for an invitation, her hands trembling. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched as if she'd been carrying secrets too heavy to bear. "Emma," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the window as though someone might be listening. "We don't have much time." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She pulled a sealed envelope from her purse and pressed it into my hands. My stomach dropped at the weight of it, thin yet impossibly heavy. "Mom, what is this?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her whisper burned into my soul. "It's time to tell them who you really are." The words sliced through the silence. My fingers shook as I stared down at the envelope, its neat wax seal catching the light. My pulse roared in my ears. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "Who I really am?" Her lips trembled, but her voice grew steadier. "Your father has lied for years. He made you believe you were powerless. But you're not, Emma. Your grandfather made sure of that before he died." I felt dizzy, clutching the envelope to my chest. "You knew?" My voice was barely more than a breath. "I knew enough," she said, her voice breaking. "And I stayed quiet because I was afraid of Richard, afraid of what he'd do if anyone ever found out. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after I watched him strip you of everything in front of the entire board. He doesn't get to erase you, Emma." Tears blurred my vision. My mother, the woman who had always seemed so fragile in Richard's shadow, was now the only person standing between me and complete ruin. She placed both hands on my shoulders, her grip surprisingly firm. "Inside that envelope are papers Eugene gave me," she said softly. "Proof that you're more than what your father wants the world to believe. Keep it safe, and when the time comes, use it." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but my throat closed. All I could do was nod, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt something stir inside me. A spark, small, fragile, but real. Hope. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its wax seal gleaming faintly under the yellow light. I circled it as if it were alive, as though opening it would change everything I thought I knew. My mother had left in silence, only squeezing my hand before disappearing into the rain. Her words echoed over and over in my mind. It's time to tell them who you really are. By dawn, I couldn't resist any longer. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the documents inside. The first was a letter written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. My breath caught. Emma, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I never trusted Richard to honor my wishes. You are my true heir, not Ethan, not your father. I left proof of this with your mother so you could one day defend yourself. Never doubt who you are. You carry my blood, my values, my legacy. Tears spilled onto the page as I pressed the letter to my chest. My grandfather had believed in me until his very last breath. He had prepared for this betrayal. He had chosen me. Behind the letter was a certified birth record. My eyes widened as I scanned the lines. It listed my full name, Emma Moore, but under father, the line was blank. Instead, there was a notarized amendment signed years later by Eugene Moore himself, legally recognizing me as his heir through bloodline acknowledgement. I gasped. All these years, Richard had let me believe I was his daughter, his unwanted, invisible child. But the truth was worse and better all at once. He wasn't my father at all. My mother had kept the secret, and my grandfather had stepped in to make sure I could never be erased. My hands shook violently as memories flooded back. Richard's coldness, his refusal to ever call me his little girl, his constant preference for Ethan. Suddenly, it all made sense. I had been the living reminder of a truth he tried to bury. The final page in the envelope was even more damning. A notarized copy of my grandfather's last statement, written separately from any official will. It was brief, but powerful. To Emma, I leave Moore and Sons to her, for she has the integrity to protect what I built. If Richard challenges this, know that my word has always been stronger than his greed. I pressed the document flat against the table, my heart hammering. This wasn't just a hidden truth. It was dynamite. But with the truth came fear. If Richard discovered I had this, he wouldn't just fight me in court. He would try to destroy me, the way he destroyed anyone who stood in his path. For the first time, I understood that my battle wasn't only for an inheritance, it was for survival. The following Sunday, Richard called for a family gathering at the Moore estate. I almost didn't go, but something inside me whispered that it was time. I slipped the envelope into my bag, my grandfather's words burning in my chest. Never doubt who you are. The mansion glowed with chandeliers and crystal glasses, but the air felt poisoned. Richard stood at the center of the parlor in a tailored navy suit, Ethan lounging beside him like a prince awaiting his crown. Relatives and board members filled the room, murmuring polite compliments and sipping wine. When I entered, the room quieted.
Emma, Richard said coolly, I wasn't sure you'd show up.
Neither was I replied, forcing myself to meet his gaze. He smirked, lifting his glass. We're here to celebrate Ethan's official appointment as Vice President of Moore and Sons. A new era for this family. Applause followed, hollow and distant. Ethan grinned, soaking it in. Guess I'll have to get used to people calling me sir, he quipped, his eyes sliding toward me with a cruel sparkle. Enough! I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Before you start crowning Ethan, there's something everyone here deserves to know. The chatter stilled. Richard's smile faltered. This isn't the time, Emma. No, Dad, I snapped, the word bitter on my tongue. It's exactly the time. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Gasps rippled through the room.
What is that?
Ethan asked, his smirk wavering. Proof, I said, my voice rising. Proof that Grandpa never intended for this company to fall into your hands. Proof that he chose me as his heir. Richard's face hardened, color draining from his skin.
Sit down, Emma. You're embarrassing yourself.
I opened the letter, my hands trembling, but my voice clear as I read aloud. To Emma, I leave Moore and Sons to her, for she has the integrity to protect what I built.
The room erupted in whispers. Some faces showed shock, others awe. Richard's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. You think a few scraps of paper will change anything? He barked. This company is mine by law. You're nothing, Emma. Nothing. His words cut deep, but I refused to flinch.
You've lied long enough. You kept the truth from me, from everyone. But Grandpa knew who I was. He made sure of it.
Ethan slammed his glass onto the table. This is pathetic. You're jealous, that's all. Everyone knows I'm the rightful heir. No, Ethan, I said softly, almost pitying him. You've been living in a fantasy built on Dad's lies, and deep down, you know it. Richard lunged toward me, his face red with fury. But my mother rose from her chair and stepped between us. For the first time, she defied him. She's telling the truth, Richard, she said, her voice shaking but strong. I've kept quiet for too long. Eugene left those papers with me because he didn't trust you. He wanted Emma to inherit, not you or Ethan. The room fell into stunned silence. Whispers spread among the board members, doubt taking root. And I knew there was no turning back. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless daughter in Richard's shadow. I was the storm he couldn't contain. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The echoes of Richard's fury replayed in my mind, but louder than that was the memory of my mother standing between us, her voice unshaken for the first time in my life. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Still, I knew my father wouldn't stop. If anything, I had just declared war. The next morning, I reached out to Daniel Carter, a lawyer I'd met years earlier at a business conference. Unlike the polished corporate sharks my father surrounded himself with, Daniel had a reputation for being relentless, the kind of man who could drag truth out of the deepest shadows. He agreed to meet me at a quiet cafe far from the city center. When I slid the envelope across the table, he read each page carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with every document. After a long silence, he looked up at me. Emma, this is powerful, he said slowly. But it's not bulletproof. If your father's already manipulated documents, he'll fight this in court and try to make you look unstable. So what do I need? I asked, my voice tight. Evidence of tampering, he replied. If Eugene had a formal will and it disappeared, we need to find out who hid it. And if Richard was behind it, we'll need financial trails, witnesses, anything that ties him to the cover-up. The idea of facing my father in court sent a chill through me, but I nodded. Then we start digging. Days turned into weeks. Daniel pulled old records and contacted former employees from my grandfather's lawyer's office. I spent sleepless nights combing through emails, contracts, and archived files, searching for anything that felt wrong. Finally, one of Daniel's contacts, a former secretary from the law office, agreed to meet us. Her name was Linda, a timid woman in her 60s. She clutched her purse as if it could shield her from the weight of her confession. I saw a will, she whispered from the back booth of a diner. Eugene signed it. It was kept in Mr. Pierce's safe. Her voice trembled. After he passed, it was gone. When I asked about it, Richard came to the office. The next day, the safe was empty. My blood ran cold. It confirmed everything I'd feared. Richard and Norman Pierce, my grandfather's trusted lawyer, had colluded. But the deeper we dug, the darker things became. One night, after leaving Daniel's office, I noticed a black sedan parked across from my apartment. Its engine idled, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. An hour later, it was still there. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Stop, before it's too late. My hands shook as I read it. When I showed Daniel, his expression hardened. This means you're getting close. Richard's scared. But Emma, you need to be careful. If he was desperate enough to erase a will, he's desperate enough to erase anyone who threatens him.
That night, I packed a bag and went to my mother's house. Lying awake in her guest room, the note burned in my mind. Richard wanted me silent, but my grandfather's voice echoed louder. They cannot take your honor unless you give it away. I wasn't ready to give anything away. Not now. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, but to me, it felt like a battlefield. Every tick of the clock pounded in my chest. I clutched the folder Daniel and I had assembled: my grandfather's letter, the certified birth record, Linda's testimony, and proof of the vanished will. Richard sat across the room, in a charcoal suit, silver cufflinks gleaming. His face was stone, but his eyes burned with fury. Ethan sat beside him, adjusting his tie, his confidence brittle. Norman Pierce shifted uncomfortably, color draining from his face. When the judge entered, silence fell. "We are here to hear the case regarding the estate of Eugene Moore," she said sharply. Daniel rose. "Your Honor, we submit that Richard Moore, with the assistance of attorney Norman Pierce, deliberately concealed Mr. Moore's true will in order to seize control of Moore and Sons. We have documents, witnesses, and testimony proving my client, Emma Moore, was the intended heir." He handed over the envelope. "Proceed," the judge said. "Emma," Daniel said gently, "please take the stand." My knees nearly buckled, but I walked forward, swore the oath, and faced the microphone. "This letter," I said, holding it up, "was written in my grandfather's final days. He states clearly that I am his heir. He entrusted these papers to my mother because he did not trust Richard." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Linda testified next, her voice shaking but unwavering. "I saw the will. Eugene signed it. After his death, Richard came to the office. The will disappeared the next day." Then Richard took the stand. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Emma is delusional. My father never intended for her to inherit. She was weak. The estate came to me by law." "By your law," I interrupted, my voice carrying. "You hated me because I wasn't yours. You tried to erase me, just like you erased Grandpa's will." The courtroom froze. Daniel presented the final evidence: financial withdrawals timed with the disappearance of the will and the threats. Richard faltered. Pierce couldn't deny it. The gavel struck. "This court finds sufficient cause to open a criminal investigation," the judge ruled. "The estate is frozen, pending resolution." I exhaled, shaking. Richard glared at me as bailiffs approached. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No," I said quietly. "For you it is." Weeks later, the dust settled. Richard and Pierce faced charges. The court recognized me as my grandfather's heir. Moore and Sons was mine, not as a prize, but as a responsibility. Ethan came to me, humbled. I let him stay, at the bottom. Standing beneath my grandfather's portrait one evening, I felt peace for the first time in years. "I'll protect what you left me," I whispered, "with honor." And I knew, somehow, that he was proud. Weeks passed after the courtroom erupted into chaos, and slowly the dust began to settle. Richard and Norman Pierce were pulled into a full criminal investigation for fraud and will concealment. Subpoenas followed, accounts were frozen, and the authority my father had wielded for decades crumbled under the weight of his own lies. For years, his power had felt untouchable. Now, stripped of silence and secrecy, it was fragile, exposed, and finally accountable. The estate was no longer in limbo. With my grandfather's letter, the notarized records, and the testimony brought forward, the court formally recognized me as Eugene Moore's rightful heir. When the ruling came down, I felt something in my chest loosen, as if I had been holding my breath since the day of his funeral and was only now allowed to exhale. Moore and Sons was mine, not as a trophy, not as a symbol of victory, but as the living legacy my grandfather had poured his life into. Walking through the company headquarters again felt surreal. The cracked marble floors echoed beneath my heels, familiar and grounding. The walls were lined with photographs of past projects, bridges, hospitals, housing developments. each one a testament to my grandfather's belief that buildings should serve people, not egos. I remembered the nights we spent bent over blueprints together, his finger tracing lines as he explained why foundations mattered more than facades. A sturdy building, he used to say, must be built on fairness. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to rebuild, to undo the damage greed and fear had nearly destroyed. Ethan surprised me. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the windows gold, he knocked on my office door. Gone was the smirk. Gone was the swagger. He looked smaller somehow, weighed down by the truth. "Emma," he said quietly, "I was wrong." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "Dad made me believe I deserved everything," he continued, "that it was my birthright. But I see it now. He used me." His voice faltered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I want to make things right. Let me help." I studied him, torn between years of resentment and the faint possibility that he wasn't beyond redemption. After a long moment, I nodded. "You'll start at the bottom," I said. "No shortcuts, no special treatment. If you want redemption, you'll earn it." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Thank you." Later that night, long after the building had emptied, I stood alone in the lobby beneath my grandfather's portrait. His eyes, steady and kind, seemed to meet mine. For the first time since his death, the ache in my chest softened. I thought of my mother, whose quiet courage had finally broken years of fear. Of Ethan, trying to find his way out of the shadow he'd been raised in. And of Richard, now reduced to a cautionary tale, a man who chose greed over family and lost everything. As I stepped outside, the crisp Boston air filled my lungs. The city lights shimmered like distant stars, each one a reminder of the future waiting to be built. I paused, looking up into the night, and whispered, not to the world, but to the man who had believed in me when no one else did. "I'll protect what you left me, Grandpa. Not with fear, not with lies, but with honor." For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing on borrowed ground. I knew, deep in my bones, that I belonged exactly where I was, and that somewhere beyond the darkness, he was smiling, proud that his legacy had finally found its rightful guardian.